The first whispers of the impossible began in the high deserts of Chile, where the air was thin and dry enough to sharpen the eyes of machines. The Cerro Palomeas array had watched the skies for decades, recording the steady pulse of quasars, the shifting shimmer of distant galaxies, and the redshifted echo of the birth of everything. It had never seen a message. Yet one cold night, as Earth turned beneath the endless quilt of stars, the array's instruments registered a pattern hidden in the wash of radiation from the galactic center. A pulse buried in the roar of Sagittarius A, the supermassive black hole that anchored the Milky Way. At first, the signal looked like noise. A cluster of technicians dismissed it as a computational error, perhaps the ghost of a satellite sweeping its dish across the stars. But the data returned again, stronger, more insistent, as if the darkness itself was trying to speak. Within weeks, observatories on 3 continents and in orbit confirmed it. Something at the event horizon was radiating order, mathematical sequences too precise to be chance. Prime numbers, ratios that aligned with the fundamentals of physics, harmonics that rose and fell like a tide. The scientific community, usually cautious and methodical, erupted into uproar. Some claimed the signal was proof of an advanced intelligence. Others argued it must be an artifact of gravitational lensing, a trick of relativity. But those who listened closely, who pored over the streams of numbers until their eyes burned, swore they could hear intent inside the static. The world governments convened in urgency. For centuries, humanity had searched for signs of life beyond Earth, and here it was, boiling from the abyss at the center of the galaxy. It was not a whisper across light years of void. It was a shout, a declaration hurled from the mouth of the cosmic predator that devoured even light. Months passed, then a year. The signal grew louder. Satellites orbiting in deep space, shielded from terrestrial interference, captured new bursts of structure, diagrams of atomic lattices, impossible geometries, sequences that seemed to describe machinery no human mind could construct. Then came the breakthrough. The Vega Institute in South Africa decrypted a portion of the transmissions. Buried within the lattice of numbers was motion, schematics that unfolded when rendered across time. They showed shapes like living vessels, part organic, part mechanical, writhing as if to escape confinement. Some scientists recoiled in awe, others in fear, for the diagrams were not messages sent to humanity. They were broadcasts of emergence, like a cocoon cracking open. The first images arrived 3 years later. The helioscope, a solar-powered observatory orbiting far beyond Pluto, focused its instruments on Sagittarius A. What it captured defied physics. Filaments of matter rising against the pull of the singularity, streams of plasma curling back into coherent form. Something was climbing out of the black hole. The footage was grainy, distorted by gravitational shearing, but the patterns were undeniable. Vast silhouettes unfurled wings of plasma 100 kilometers wide. Tendrils of magnetic force lashed against the void. Whole fleets, if they could be called that, moved as though swimming through the fabric of reality. For the first time in its history, humanity confronted a truth older than itself. It was not alone, and what lay beyond was not benign. On Earth, nations reacted with panic and preparation. Old rivalries collapsed under the weight of a larger terror. Defense budgets swelled beyond reason. Spaceports, once symbols of exploration, became fortresses. Humanity armed itself for a war no one yet understood. Despite the fear, there were voices of hope. Perhaps these entities were explorers themselves, survivors who had braved the maw of the singularity to seek kinship. Perhaps the diagrams were not weapons, but offerings. For a time, diplomats, philosophers, and religious leaders urged restraint. But then the first fleet arrived. It began as a distortion, a shimmer on the edge of known space. Observatories stationed at the Oort cloud registered gravitational anomalies, slight warps in trajectory that no natural body could explain. A week later, the sky tore open. A vessel larger than Mount Everest, unfolded from a crack in space. Its surface pulsed like flesh, but glimmered with lattices of metal that healed and reshaped themselves in endless fractal patterns. Behind it came more 6, then 12, then hundreds. A migration of leviathans birthed from the maw of Sagittarius A. They did not slow, they did not signal. They swept past the scattered probes and research stations as though humanity were dust. The void bent under their passage, leaving wakes of radiation like scars across the stars. Earth watched in silence, caught between wonder and dread. The first words spoken about them came from a technician at the lunar relay station who saw the shadow of one vast creature blot out the sun. He whispered into his headset, voice trembling, "They are here." Within days, Earth learned what here truly meant. The invaders moved with singular purpose, descending upon the asteroid colonies that orbited Mars. With tendrils of living metal, they punctured habitats, tore apart mining stations, and fed on the stripped rock as though drinking marrow from bone. Broadcasts of the massacre reached Earth before the colonies went silent. Children clutching at airless throats, miners crushed in implosions, cities reduced to husks. The footage ran unfiltered, spreading horror across every screen. The hope of diplomacy evaporated. Humanity had always imagined that the first visitors would be gods, mentors, or at worst indifferent explorers. Instead, they had summoned predators who had clawed their way out of the black hole and found in humanity a harvest worth reaping. The invaders had made their first mistake, believing Earth would be easy prey. Even as the colonies burned, something deeper ignited across humanity. For the first time in its fractured history, Earth united under one resolve, not to surrender, not to flee, but to fight. The great shipyards roared to life. Factories once devoted to cars and luxuries became forges of war. Every scientist, engineer, and soldier was summoned. Humanity, wounded and terrified, began to sharpen itself into a weapon. And far away, at the edge of the system, the invaders drifted closer, vast and indifferent, unaware that the prey they had chosen had teeth. The age of waiting was over. The signal had become a storm. The black hole had vomited forth its children, and they were here to devour, but Earth would not bow. The first war between humanity and the abyss had begun. The silence of space had always been humanity's great canvas. Vast, indifferent, eternal. Now that canvas was torn apart by things that should never have been able to leave the maw of a singularity. The fleet that entered the solar system did not move like ships. They glided as though swimming through an unseen ocean, wings of dark plasma trailing behind them. Their hulls, if such things could be called hulls, were a union of bone-white lattice and molten metal. Segments flexed like muscle. Spines glowed with internal fire. Some resembled titanic fish, others twisted shells, others still were too alien for the human mind to classify. At first, their movement was slow, deliberate, almost graceful. They orbited the asteroid belt and consumed matter with the patience of harvesters, dissolving kilometers of rock in minutes with beams that resembled concentrated moonlight. What they extracted, no human physicist could entirely explain. The rocks they devoured became scaffolds of living machinery, reshaped and absorbed into their bodies. Theories poured from every scientific quarter. Some insisted these creatures were survivors of physics itself, entities who had long ago mastered spacetime manipulation and used the black hole as a gateway. Others suggested they were prisoners that the singularity had barely managed to contain, and now its grip had loosened. But as humanity debated, the creatures advanced. The first direct attack fell upon Phobos Station, a sprawling outpost orbiting the smaller Martian moon. Phobos Station had been built as a military hub and mining node, armored in steel and rock, bristling with defense turrets. It housed 30,000 souls, soldiers and families alike. The invaders approached without hesitation. They did not send envoys. They did not fire warning shots. One Leviathan extended a spine and released a pulse of violet light that shattered Phobos Station's shields in seconds. Another unfurled a more lined with fractal blades and swallowed the station whole, dragging it into a cavity in its own body. There were no survivors. The broadcasts reached Earth within minutes. The images were too grotesque to be denied. Humanity had not been misunderstood. Humanity was prey. The Earth Defense Assembly, hastily formed from every major nation, met in a secured orbital platform circling the moon. Generals, scientists, and heads of state crowded the chamber, faces pale under harsh white light. "They are not here to negotiate," said Chairwoman May Yulin, voice steady despite the terror etched in her features. "We must accept this truth. We are at war." Admiral Rafael Calderon slammed a fist on the table. "They are feeding on our colonies like cattle. If we wait, Earth will be next." Dr. Leila Amanqua, lead physicist of the Helioscope project, countered, "We know almost nothing about their biology or technology. Our weapons may not harm them at all. We cannot strike blindly." But the decision had already taken root. Too much blood had been shed to pretend diplomacy was possible. Humanity's only option was defiance. Within days, fleets mobilized. Earth's orbit became a forge of fire. Railgun platforms were dragged into position. Missile silos buried in lunar rock awoke. Mars, wounded but unbroken, assembled its remaining fleets. Even the distant colonies of Europa and Titan began converting mining craft into warships. The first confrontation came at Ceres, the largest body in the asteroid belt. A flotilla of human vessels, 300 strong, advanced to intercept the Leviathans, dismantling the dwarf planet. The fleet carried railguns, particle lances, nuclear warheads, every weapon humanity had ever dreamed of. For hours, the battle was chaos. Nuclear detonations lit the void like newborn suns. Railgun slugs pierced through alien hulls, ripping flesh metal open. Leviathans roared in electromagnetic fury, lashing out with beams that sliced ships in half like paper. It was slaughter. 2/3 of the human fleet perished in the first wave. Crews screamed into comms as oxygen boiled from ruptured hulls. Fighters were snared by tendrils of living cable and dragged into alien mouths. Whole destroyers were pierced through and left to drift, burning from within. And yet humanity endured. The surviving third of the fleet, battered and bloodied, discovered something crucial. The aliens were powerful, yes, but they bled. Where human weapons tore deeply enough, the Leviathans convulsed and faltered. Some even died. Their corpses froze into grotesque sculptures, slowly disintegrating into dust. Ceres was lost, but the aliens had been forced to retreat from its orbit. For the first time, humanity had proof these monsters could be killed. News of the partial victory spread across Earth like fire. In the face of grief, a new kind of determination emerged. Humanity could not match the aliens in strength or speed, but humanity could adapt. Humanity could resist. Meanwhile, in the depths of space, the Leviathans gathered. Their movements, once languid, now sharpened with aggression. They no longer drifted like explorers, they advanced like conquerors. They began to build. Across the asteroid belt, immense structures took shape, dark spires grown from harvested rock, pulsing with inner light. Observers speculated they were nests, forward-operating bases, perhaps even weapons designed to harness the mass of entire asteroids. It was then that fragments of alien communication were intercepted. The patterns were not sound, not light, but gravitational ripples encoded in a language beyond human comprehension. For weeks, teams of cryptographers and physicists labored in hidden bunkers, trying to crack the sequences. When meaning finally emerged, it chilled every soul who read it. The messages were not strategic plans. They were not instructions or battle orders. They were hymns. Chants of triumph, sung in gravitational waves, celebrating the harvest of new prey. The Leviathans did not see themselves as invaders. They saw themselves as divine reapers, fulfilling some ancient cycle. Humanity was not an equal adversary to them, not even an enemy. Humanity was food, but food had never fought back like this before. On Earth, hidden beneath the frozen cliffs of Antarctica, a council of engineers unveiled a weapon humanity had never before dared to construct. The Prometheus Array, a colossal network of satellites designed to channel the sun's energy into concentrated beams. Originally conceived as a planetary defense system against asteroids, it was now repurposed as a weapon against the Leviathans. When the array fired for the first time near Jupiter's orbit, a column of pure solar fire lanced through space and struck a Leviathan head-on. The creature screamed in frequencies that shattered instruments across half the fleet. Its body convulsed, cracked, and then disintegrated into ash. The cheer that erupted across Earth was unlike anything in history. Humanity had slain one of the Reapers outright, but even in triumph there was unease. For as the Leviathan's body crumbled, instruments recorded something impossible. Fragments of it did not drift into space. They fell inward, as though pulled by an unseen force, vanishing toward the galactic center. It was as if the black holes still owned them, even here. For the first time, scientists began to whisper questions too terrible to answer. Why had these beings emerged from Sagittarius A? Had they been trapped, or had they chosen to leave? Were they refugees, or were they merely scouts of something far greater, still imprisoned within the event horizon? The assembly silenced such questions in public. Fear could not be allowed to fester. The message to humanity was clear: fight, resist, endure. But in secret, in hushed conversations in shadowed rooms, leaders admitted the truth. They did not know if victory was even possible. What they did know was this: the Leviathans had underestimated their prey. Humanity was no herd waiting to be culled. Humanity was a species forged in struggle, sharpened by survival, and armed now with desperation. The invaders had emerged into the wrong galaxy at the wrong time against the wrong foe, and humanity was only beginning to bare its teeth. The war had begun without words. Humanity had seen its stations devoured, its colonies torn apart, its fleets scattered. Yet amidst the carnage, one truth lingered like a wound. No attempt at communication had been made. The assembly debated endlessly whether the Leviathans even possessed language as humans understood it. They sang to one another in gravitational ripples and electromagnetic storms, but those were hymns, not conversations. They issued no demands, broadcast no ultimatums. They consumed, they built, and they advanced. Still, there were those who argued for contact. Dr. Layla Amankwa, now appointed Chief Science Envoy, believed it essential. Even predators communicate, she said to the council. The tiger roars, the wolf growls. If we can show them we are not prey but peers, perhaps the slaughter can end. Admiral Calderon spat back. You saw what they did at Phobos. You saw the hymns. To them we are cattle. You do not negotiate with the butcher when you are already on the table. Yet the assembly, ever torn between hope and desperation, authorized a single mission, an envoy to attempt first contact. The chosen vessel was the Herald of Dawn, a sleek diplomatic cruiser refitted for defense. Its hull was polished to mirror brightness, a symbolic gesture of openness. It carried an arsenal of languages, mathematical codes, and transmissions designed to bridge gulfs between species. On board were 50 crew members, half of them scientists, half of them soldiers. Their destination was an alien construct growing from the shattered remains of Vesta. Observers had watched for weeks as the Leviathans harvested the asteroid, reshaping its mass into a spire bristling with luminous veins. It pulsed like a heart, sending out bursts of radiation in rhythmic patterns. Some speculated it was a beacon, others a factory. Whatever it was, it represented permanence, a place where contact might be attempted. The Herald of Dawn slipped from Mars' orbit with an escort of 6 warships. The escort would remain at a distance, ready to intervene if the Leviathans attacked. But the crew of the Herald knew the truth. If hostilities began, they would be consumed before help arrived. As the vessel approached Vesta's shadow, the alien spire loomed into view. It rose from the asteroid like a blackened fang, miles high, its surface rippling with liquid metal that rearranged itself in ceaseless patterns. Lightning crawled across its flanks. At its base, Smaller leviathans clung like remoras, grafting fragments of captured rock into its body. Captain Eshan Virani, commander of the Herald, ordered the transmission array activated. Across the void, the ship began to broadcast pulses of mathematics, prime numbers, ratios of fundamental constants, visual diagrams of atoms, then DNA, then human silhouettes. For an hour, nothing happened. The Leviathans continued their work indifferent. Then the spire stirred. A tremor rippled along its length. Segments opened like petals. From within emerged a creature unlike the others. Smaller yet no less terrifying, its form was serpentine, its body composed of rings of interlocking plates. It drifted free of the spire and coiled through space, its head crowned with tendrils of radiant light. "Target acquisition," whispered one of the soldiers, though his weapon was useless at this distance. The serpent approached the herald slowly, sinuously, as though studying the vessel. Instruments wailed as it emitted bursts of gravitational energy, scanning every molecule of the ship. "Maintain transmissions," ordered Captain Virani. His voice trembled but did not break. "Show them we are here to speak." The herald projected images now, humanity's history rendered in simple pictographs, scenes of agriculture, cities, art, exploration. A mother cradling a child. A hand extended in peace. The serpent paused, its head tilted as though considering, then it answered. The response was not in mathematics, nor in symbols, but in raw sensation. The ship's instruments convulsed as a wave of gravitational energy struck. Crew members staggered, clutching their skulls, as if an immense pressure had been driven into their bones. For a brief instant, every mind aboard the Herald was filled with visions not their own. They saw stars falling into darkness. They saw civilizations screaming as they were torn apart. They saw endless harvests across uncounted galaxies. And through it all, they felt hunger, vast, unending, sacred hunger. The serpent's hymn was not a greeting, it was revelation. Dr. Amankwa collapsed to her knees, eyes wide with horror. "They are not conquerors," she whispered. "They are worshippers. To them, the act of consuming us is not war, it is devotion." Captain Virani gave the order to retreat, shut down transmissions, pull us back. But the serpent did not allow it. Tendrils of radiant light lashed forward, wrapping around the Herald's hull. Metal groaned as the ship was dragged toward the spire. The escort fleet reacted instantly. Warships fired railgun slugs and missile salvos, striking the serpent with blinding force. Segments of its body ruptured, spilling fluid that crystallized in the void. It shrieked in gravitational waves that shattered the Herald's comms. In the chaos, the Herald broke free, engines screaming as they pushed the vessel away. The serpent coiled in agony but did not fall. Instead, it turned its fury on the escorts. The warships fought valiantly. They poured fire into the serpent until its body glowed with wounds. At last, one lucky strike severed its head, sending it tumbling lifeless into the void. But the cost was heavy. Of the 6 escorts, 3 were annihilated. The others limped away, scarred and burning. The Herald of Dawn survived, but its mission had failed. There had been no dialogue, only revelation. The Leviathans did not negotiate. To consume was to worship, to devour was to pray. When the survivors returned to Earth, the assembly listened to their testimony in silence. Dr. Amankwa's words were etched into history. "They do not see us as lesser, they do not see us at all. To them, we are the offering, the sacrifice laid upon their altar. They cannot be reasoned with, they can only be resisted." The attempt at peace was over. In the weeks that followed, the spire at Vesta multiplied. 2 more rose from the asteroid belt, their forms grotesque and radiant, each guarded by serpents and larger leviathans. They pulsed in unison, sending out gravitational hymns that echoed across the system. Scientists detected something dreadful in their rhythm. The hymns were not random, they were counting down, to what no one knew. The assembly issued its proclamation. Humanity was no longer at war with invaders. It was at war with a religion born from the abyss. A religion that worshipped hunger and sought to turn the solar system into its temple. And in that war, failure meant extinction. The hope of dialogue had died at Vesta. The first contact had become the first confirmation of humanity's greatest fear. The Reapers had not come to conquer, they had come to feed. The Assembly's proclamation rang across the planet. They are not gods, they are not lords, they are parasites, and we will burn them. The funeral of the fallen from Vesta was broadcast worldwide. Families gathered before screens, holding candles in silence as names scrolled endlessly across the sky. Humanity mourned, but mourning hardened into rage. The time for patience was over. Humanity would not wait for another Phobos, another Ceres, another slaughter. The Assembly demanded blood, and the armies of Earth answered. The great factories of Mars thundered day and night. For generations, they had mined the red planet's bones, extracting iron and fuel. Now those resources were poured into the fire of war. Entire cities were converted into shipyards. Vast smelters belched flame as hull after hull slid into orbit. Among the first vessels born of this frenzy was the Iron Resolve, a dreadnought unlike any before it. 5 kilometers long, its railguns could launch tungsten slugs at near-relativistic speeds. It bristled with particle lances, missile silos, and point defense cannons. Its armor was layered in ablative plating, backed by magnetic shields that flickered like auroras. But even more terrifying than its weapons was its heart. At its core, scientists had installed a stolen fragment of alien tissue harvested from the corpse of the serpent slain at Vesta. The tissue was fused into a reactor, amplifying its power output tenfold. The Iron Resolve was not merely human, it was hybrid. The ship's commissioning ceremony was brief, austere. Admiral Calderon himself spoke. They came from the black hole believing us cattle. Today we show them the herd bites back. Intelligence reports suggested the Leviathans were preparing another spire, this time on Pallas, a dwarf world deep within the asteroid belt. Dozens of creatures circled the rock, their tendrils weaving lattices of living metal across its surface. The Assembly saw an opportunity. The spire was still unfinished. If humanity could destroy it before completion, it would prove the invaders were not untouchable. The Iron Resolve led the assault, accompanied by 200 warships. Their plan was simple: strike hard, strike fast, retreat before the Leviathans could respond. When the fleet arrived, Pallas loomed ahead, half-shrouded in scaffolds of alien bone metal. The Leviathans stirred, sensing prey. Admiral Calderon gave the order. Fire! The void erupted. Railguns roared, hurling slugs that tore through alien flesh in sprays of burning ichor. Particle beams carved gouges across their wings. Missiles swarmed, detonating with fury that painted the asteroid belt in suns. The Iron Resolve unleashed its reactor's fury. A lance of energy brighter than lightning seared across space and punched a hole clean through a Leviathan the size of a mountain. The creature writhed, convulsed, and died screaming in gravitational waves. The spire itself shuddered under the assault. Its scaffolds collapsed, glowing veins sputtering into darkness. For the first time in the war, humanity destroyed one of the Reapers' sacred altars. The cheer that erupted across the fleet was primal. Soldiers screamed into their comms, fists raised in triumph. They bleed, they burn, but the victory was not free. The Leviathans retaliated with fury. They unleashed beams of violet energy that sliced ships apart like paper. They hurled tendrils tipped with barbs of plasma, skewering cruisers and dragging them into their maws. One Leviathan latched onto the Iron Resolve, wrapping it in coils of molten metal. The dreadnought groaned as its armor buckled. Inside, alarms wailed. Captain Sanar Idrissi, commander of the dreadnought, stood firm. Overload the reactor, full discharge. Her crew hesitated. That could destroy us. Better us than Earth, she answered. The hybrid reactor screamed as its alien tissue was forced beyond its limits. A torrent of energy burst outward, vaporizing the Leviathan in an explosion of light. The Iron Resolve reeled, its armor scorched, but it endured. When the smoke cleared, the spire on Pallas was rubble. The Leviathans, wounded and enraged, scattered into the belt. Humanity had struck its first true blow. News of the victory spread across the solar system like wildfire. Crowds filled streets, chanting the names of the fallen ships. Children painted murals of the iron resolve blazing through the void. For the first time, hope outweighed fear, yet victory carried a shadow. Of the 200 ships that launched, barely half returned. The asteroid belt glittered with wreckage and frozen corpses. And there was something worse. As sensors studied the aftermath, they recorded a new phenomenon. Fragments of the destroyed spire did not drift away. They dissolved into streams of light, which flowed toward the galactic center. Just as with the serpent's corpse, the black hole seemed to reclaim its children. Dr. Amankwa analyzed the data with growing dread. "They are not individuals," she said quietly to the assembly. "They are extensions, pieces of something larger. Killing them may not weaken it, it may be feeding it." But her warning was drowned in the roar of celebration. Humanity had bled the Reapers, and for now, that was all that mattered. The Leviathans did not suffer defeat in silence. Days after Pallas, the solar system trembled with their fury. Gravitational hymns surged from their spires, louder than ever, echoing across every planet. The hymns were no longer reverent. They were shrieks of rage. Scientists deciphered fragments. The hymns spoke of a defiance unseen since the dawn of their faith, of prey that dared to strike the altar, of sacrilege that demanded annihilation. The countdown within their chants accelerated. The assembly's analysts warned the Leviathans were preparing something vast, perhaps an invasion of Earth itself, perhaps a summoning of whatever lay deeper in the black hole. Humanity had no choice but to press harder, to strike again before the Reapers could finish their ritual. The weeks that followed became a storm of violence. Battles erupted at every corner of the asteroid belt. Human fleets launched raids on alien nests, burning their scaffolds, slaughtering their serpents. The Prometheus array fired again and again, its beams slicing Leviathans apart. The aliens retaliated with equal fury. Colonies on Europa and Ganymede were besieged. Entire convoys vanished into the jaws of Leviathans. Jupiter's upper atmosphere became a graveyard of shattered ships. But for all their power, the invaders began to falter. They had expected easy prey, not predators. Humanity's tactics shifted constantly: ambushes, traps, weapons improvised from mining lasers and gravitational slingshots. The adaptability that had once built empires on Earth now fueled a resistance in the stars. And slowly, impossibly, the tide began to turn. In the wreckage of Pallas, scavenger crews searching for salvage discovered something extraordinary: an intact fragment of alien neural tissue preserved in frozen vacuum. Scientists brought it to Luna, where hidden labs probed its secrets. With delicate instruments, they teased fragments of memory from the tissue, impressions, visions, half-dreams. What they found shook them to their core. The Leviathans had not come merely to harvest. They had come fleeing from something deeper inside the black hole, something even they feared. The discovery was kept secret from the public. Humanity needed rage, not doubt, but within the assembly, the truth burned like a second fire. The Leviathans were not the true enemy. They were heralds. And whatever lay beyond the event horizon might already be stirring. The asteroid belt no longer belonged to the Reapers. Where once their spires rose unchallenged, now their altars lay in ruins, blackened husks drifting through space. The Iron Resolve and her sister ships had carved scars into the invaders' faith. Humanity's retaliation had drawn blood. But war, once ignited, does not remain contained. It spreads, spiraling outward until all are consumed. The Leviathans struck back with fury against Jupiter's colonies. Ganymede, Europa, and Callisto had long been humanity's jewels: oceanic laboratories, mining hubs, and thriving cities beneath domes of glass. They had never been built to withstand war. The attack came without warning. Dozens of Leviathans descended from the outer dark, their wings blotting out stars. Their hymns shook the ice itself. Entire cities collapsed as beams of violet fire cut through domes, venting atmospheres into the void. On Europa, the ocean beneath the ice boiled. Leviathans drilled into the sea, feeding on microbial ecologies that had flourished there for millennia. On Callisto, mining stations vanished into maws that chewed rock and metal alike, but humanity no longer collapsed in silence. The colonies, though unprepared, fought with desperation. Mining lasers became weapons. Cargo haulers became kamikaze rams. On Ganymede, a militia detonated the core of an ice refinery, collapsing half a Leviathan into the surface. The creature thrashed, trapped, until swarms of fighters shredded it with bombs. For every city lost, another resisted. For every Leviathan's hymn of triumph, another screamed in death. The war had come to the moons, and the moons refused to kneel. Farther out, Saturn's rings became a battlefield of beauty and horror. The rings had always glimmered like jewels, endless rivers of ice and stone. Now they were lit by fire. Human fleets darted among the icy debris, using the rings as cover. Leviathans pursued, their bodies shattering chunks of ice into storms of glittering shrapnel. Every engagement turned the rings into a graveyard of wreckage, drifting forever among the frozen dust. In one of the most legendary battles of the war, the carrier Aurora's spear lured a Leviathan into the densest part of the rings. Fighters swarmed it, weaving among shards of ice at impossible speeds. The Leviathan thrashed, but its beams scattered uselessly off the frozen debris. At last, the carrier sacrificed itself, detonating its reactors in the Leviathan's gullet. Both predator and prey disintegrated in a bloom of fire that illuminated Saturn like a second sun. The crew's final broadcast became a rallying cry across Earth. Even gods can bleed. As battles multiplied, humanity began to notice a change. The Leviathans no longer moved as a unified swarm. Their hymns, once harmonious, grew dissonant. Some urged vengeance, others retreat. Where once they had acted as extensions of a single faith, now they quarreled. Prisoners, fragments of alien tissue torn from dead Leviathans, revealed the truth. The creatures were not mindless drones. They were zealots, but zealots with pride. Each Leviathan believed itself the truest worshipper of hunger. Each considered its hymn purer than the others. And when humanity proved capable of defiance, that pride cracked. Two Leviathans were observed turning on one another during a skirmish near Titan. They tore into each other with beams of light until both collapsed, broken and burning. Humanity did not intervene. It watched, and it learned. The Reapers were not unbreakable. They were arrogant. They were fractured. And arrogance, once wounded, festers into weakness. Humanity adapted faster than its enemy. It always had. That was its strength. Colonists who had once built habitats now built traps. Whole asteroids were hollowed out and rigged with explosives, waiting for Leviathans to harvest them. When the creatures drilled into the rock, the charges detonated, ripping them apart from within. Hacker collectives across Earth turned their talents to alien technology. By studying the fragments of spires and serpents, they discovered ways to disrupt the hymns. They could not silence them, but they could twist them, broadcast false signals that lured Leviathans into ambushes. Even children became part of the war. On Titan, schools taught survival drills beneath methane skies. On Earth, young engineers competed to design drone swarms capable of piercing alien hides. Humanity's entire species bent itself to the singular purpose of resistance. The Leviathans had expected prey. What they faced was evolution itself. The turning point of the spiral came at the shattered spire. Near the orbit of Juno, the invaders had raised their largest construct yet, a cathedral of bone metal stretching 50 kilometers, its core pulsing with energy brighter than any star. Scouts reported that the hymns of all spires now aligned with it. The shattered spire was the nexus. Destroy it, and the invaders' faith would falter. The assembly authorized the largest offensive in human history. Every surviving fleet, every weapon humanity could muster, converged. The iron resolve led the charge, its hybrid heart burning brighter than ever. The battle lasted 6 days. The void itself seemed to scream. Human fleets hammered the spire with nuclear fire and particle lances. Leviathans hurled themselves in defense, their beams carving through cruisers by the dozen. Fighters darted between colossal bodies, swarming like wasps. On the fifth day, the Iron Resolve rammed its prow into the spire itself. Its reactor discharged in a torrent of energy that ripped the construct open, exposing its core, a sphere of writhing light, pulsing with gravitational waves. Captain Idrissi gave her final order. All guns, now. The fleet obeyed. Every surviving vessel turned its weapons on the exposed core. Slugs, beams, and warheads converged. The core screamed in frequencies that shattered glass across Earth itself. Then it imploded. The shattered spire collapsed into fragments that tumbled endlessly through space. For the first time, the hymns fell silent. The cost was unimaginable. 3/4 of the fleet was gone. Entire generations of families had been extinguished. The Iron Resolve was a burning hulk drifting lifeless among the ruins, but humanity had destroyed the Nexus. The Leviathans scattered, their unity shattered, their faith broken. Across Earth, Mars, and the moons, celebrations erupted. Bells rang, sirens wailed, cities poured into streets. Humanity had not only survived, it had won a battle so vast it defied imagination. Yet even as crowds cheered, scientists studied the silence left in the hymns, and in that silence they heard something worse, not absence. From the direction of Sagittarius A, faint but undeniable, came a new signal. Deeper, darker, older, a hymn that made the Leviathans' voices sound like children's songs. The Reapers had not merely been warriors, they had been heralds, and their master had heard humanity's defiance. The silence after the fall of the shattered spire was not victory, it was anticipation. For weeks, the solar system held its breath. Humanity licked its wounds, burying its dead, reforging its fleets. The Leviathans withdrew, not destroyed but scattered, their hymns fractured into dissonance. But from the galactic center came the deeper song, a vibration that stirred instruments across every observatory, a hymn so low it rattled tectonic plates and shivered oceans. Scientists named it the Singularity Resonance. Others called it the voice of the abyss. It was not merely heard, it was felt. Children woke screaming, claiming they had seen burning skies. Pilots reported flashes of alien constellations in their dreams. Whole communities whispered the same visions. Stars collapsing, civilizations consumed, the universe itself unraveling. The assembly could not silence the truth. Something within Sagittarius A had awakened. The first breakthrough came from the secret labs beneath Luna. The fragment of alien neural tissue recovered at Pallas, when forced into resonance with the Singularity's new hymn, released a cascade of memories. Dr. Amanqua, pale from weeks without sleep, stood before the assembly to deliver her findings. "They are not conquerors," she said, voice trembling. "They are fugitives. They were never meant to leave the black hole. They were cast out, like spores carried by the tide. They emerged here because they fled something worse." Amanqua continued, "The Leviathans worship hunger because hunger is all they know. Their god is the thing inside the singularity. They do not serve it willingly. They serve because it will consume them if they do not. Their faith is fear." Admiral Calderon leaned forward, knuckles white on the table. "What is this god?" Amanqua hesitated. Then she activated the hollow. The chamber filled with a vision drawn from alien memory, a shape of infinite limbs, a mouth that was not a mouth, a lattice of darkness threaded with galaxies. Its form was too vast for comprehension. It was not a creature. It was not even a will. It was a law. "The Leviathans call it the Eater of Horizons," Amanqua whispered. "It is older than stars. It dwells inside singularities, feeding on everything that falls within. The Leviathans are its servants and its children. They escape only long enough to carry out its hunger elsewhere." A silence heavier than gravity fell across the council. If the Leviathans were heralds of something greater, humanity's war was not a final struggle. It was a prelude. Some argued that humanity should sue for peace with the fractured Leviathans, join them as allies against their master. Others insisted the aliens could never be trusted. Their faith was too deep, their hunger too intrinsic. Calderon voiced the hard truth: we cannot negotiate with zealots. But we may need them. If what dwells inside Sagittarius A comes for us, our fleets will mean nothing. We will need every weapon, even those made from our enemy's flesh. It was not a consensus, but it was enough. To uncover more, humanity would need to go closer to the singularity than ever before. For centuries, Sagittarius A had been a distant mystery. Now desperate necessity drove humanity to approach the galactic center. A fleet of probes and research vessels was prepared, armed with hybrid reactors and experimental shielding. Their mission, to skim the edges of the accretion disk, to listen to the voice of the abyss directly. The flagship of this mission was the Eventide, commanded by Captain Rafik Deneb, a man known for reckless brilliance. His ship carried scientists, soldiers, and a new kind of device, a resonance array designed to translate the gravitational hymns into coherent data. The journey would take years. The fleet set out, watched by billions, humanity's eyes fixed on the darkness. 2 years later, the Eventide reached its destination. The accretion disk of Sagittarius A stretched before them, a whirlpool of fire and shadow. Jets of energy burst from the poles, brighter than suns, illuminating the void with terrible beauty. And within that light pulsed the hymn. The resonance array translated it into sound. The crew wept at the first hearing. It was not a voice, but all voices, a choir of extinction. It sang of entropy, of the inevitable fall of all matter into nothing. It sang of hunger so vast it made galaxies into morsels, yet beneath the hymn was something else. A question, the voice was aware of them. Dr. Amankwa, now aboard the Eventide, paled as the data streamed in. It knows we exist. It asks what we are. Captain Deneb clenched his jaw. Then we tell it. Against every instinct of survival, humanity answered. The array broadcast mathematics, then images, then the history of a species that had crawled from dust to stars. For a moment, the crew glimpsed visions not their own. 1,000 civilizations, long devoured, flickering like fireflies before being swallowed. The hymn whispered, "You are prey, you will be mine." But there was hesitation. The Leviathans had always submitted. Humanity had not. That defiance intrigued the voice. Dr. Amankwa realized the terrible truth. It is not merely hunger, it is curiosity. It wonders if we can feed it in ways no other has. The crew recoiled. Humanity had drawn the gaze of the Eater of Horizons. The Eventide barely escaped. As they turned from the accretion disk, space itself twisted, tendrils of gravity reaching for them. 2 ships were lost, swallowed whole, their screams cut short as they vanished into darkness. But the flagship endured. It returned to the solar system scarred but alive, carrying its dreadful message. Humanity now knew the shape of its true enemy. The Leviathans were not the end of the war. They were its beginning. The Eater of Horizons was coming. And yet, even as the voice stirred, the Leviathans wavered. The destruction of the shattered spire had not only wounded their faith, it had revealed possibility. Scouts reported strange gatherings of Leviathans on the fringes of the system. Some fought among themselves, tearing each other apart. Others drifted aimlessly, no longer singing the hymns. One even approached human space without attacking. It lingered near Neptune's orbit, silent, as though waiting. The assembly debated furiously. Was this a trap, or had the Leviathans, fractured by fear of their god, begun to doubt? For the first time, humanity faced a choice: destroy every last Leviathan or attempt to turn their fear into alliance. It was a choice that would determine whether the species faced the Eater of Horizons alone or with the aid of the very monsters that had slaughtered them. And in the shadows of the black hole, the deeper hymn grew louder, pulsing like a heartbeat. The spiral of war was no longer just survival. It was preparation. The war had begun as slaughter. Humanity's defenses crumbled before the Leviathans, beams, cities fell silent, and the void rang with hymns of triumph. But the slaughter had hardened the survivors. What emerged from the fire was no longer prey. Now, as the Leviathans' unity collapsed, humanity sharpened its edge. The turning of the tide was not sudden. It was not a single battle. It was 1,000 blades cutting slowly into alien flesh, until the hunters realized they were bleeding to death. The first blow of the new war came from the ghost fleets. Wreckage littered the solar system, thousands of ruined ships, hulks of steel drifting lifelessly. Engineers scavenged them, rewired their power cores, and seeded them with autonomous minds. These revenant ships became traps. When Leviathans approached to feed on wreckage, the ghost fleets awoke. Engines flared, cannons fired, and drones spilled forth in swarms. Even if the Leviathans destroyed them, the sacrifice bought time and drained the predators' strength. The tactic became legend when a ghost fleet of 200 hulks lured 6 Leviathans into a debris field near Mars. Hidden human cruisers detonated magnetic charges, pinning the creatures within a storm of shrapnel. The Leviathans thrashed, but the ghost fleet rammed them relentlessly until all 6 were torn apart. The victory cost no human lives. The assembly broadcast the footage across every colony. The message was clear: the dead now fought beside the living. Humanity's scientists delved deeper into hybrid technology. By dissecting Leviathan tissue, they learned to grow armor that could absorb beams of light, to weave neural lattices into targeting systems. The line between machine and organism blurred. The most feared creation was the resonance torpedo. Packed with alien tissue wired to amplify the hymns, the torpedoes could twist a Leviathan's song into madness. Ships that fired them listened to their enemies scream, not with voices, but with ruptured harmonics that tore the creatures apart from within. Some crews went further. Rumors spread of captains fusing themselves into their ships, binding human minds directly to alien neural mesh. Admirals denied it. Pilots swore they had seen vessels move with impossible precision, reacting faster than thought. Whether true or myth, the idea inspired both awe and dread. The Leviathans themselves continued to break. Once, their hymns had been flawless. Now they clashed with one another mid-battle. One might demand pursuit, another insist on retreat. In their confusion, human fleets struck with precision. At Titan, 3 Leviathans turned their beams on each other while defending a spire. Human bombers slipped through and annihilated the structure, leaving the survivors howling in betrayal. At Neptune, the silent Leviathan returned. It drifted at the edge of human space, unarmed, unmoving. Scouts approached cautiously. They found its hide scarred and its hymn fragmented into whispers. For weeks it lingered, neither friend nor foe. Then one night its husk split apart. From within emerged smaller organisms, dozens of serpent creatures, each no larger than a fighter. They scattered into the void, leaving the husk to drift lifeless. Scientists argued endlessly. Was it defection, mutation, surrender? No answer came. But the incident proved the Leviathans were no longer a singular enemy. They were dissolving, yet victory was never simple. Humanity's push outward brought triumph, but also tragedy. The colony at Ceres had been a hub of resilience, home to millions who had resisted occupation. When a fractured Leviathan swarm attacked, the assembly dispatched reinforcements, but the swarm did not seek conquest. It sought annihilation. The Leviathans crashed into the planetoid itself, boring into the mantle, destabilizing the orbit. The defenders fought with desperate courage, detonating entire mines to collapse the tunnels. But in the end, the core split. Ceres shattered into fragments, its population extinguished in fire. The loss sent shockwaves across the system. Humanity learned a bitter lesson. Even fractured, the Leviathans were capable of catastrophic violence. Yet grief did not break humanity, it bound them tighter. From Earth to the farthest stations, colonies swore oaths of alliance stronger than any before. The assembly was no longer a distant authority, it was the heart of survival. Refugees from shattered worlds carried with them skills, knowledge, and fire. Where one colony burned, 2 more rose in defiance. Admiral Calderon addressed the species in a speech transmitted to every screen, every wall, every implant. They thought us divided, they thought us fragile, they thought us prey, but we are none of these things. We are humanity, we bend, but we do not break. And when the abyss itself comes for us, we will show it the fire of stars. The cheer that followed was not celebration, it was oath. The turning point arrived in the outer belt. Scouts discovered that the Leviathans had constructed a new nexus among the scattered rocks, half-built spires, singing fragments of their fractured hymn. The assembly ordered an assault. Every fleet that could fight was mustered. The plan was ruthless: burn the nest before it grew into another shattered spire. The battle was chaos. The Leviathans had no unity, but they had desperation. Some fought with suicidal ferocity. Others fled into the void. Human fleets advanced in coordinated waves. Fighters swarmed spires with resonance torpedoes. Cruisers hammered Leviathans into fragments. Even mining barges joined the fight, ramming with engines burning white-hot. The climax came when the carrier Sol's Wrath plunged into the largest spire, detonating its reactor. The explosion shattered the entire field, reducing half the nest to drifting shards. By the end, dozens of Leviathans were dead. The rest fled into the black. For the first time in the war, humanity did not merely survive. It conquered, but even as celebrations rose, scientists trembled. The more Leviathans humanity killed, the louder the singularity resonance grew. Instruments picked up new waves of gravitational pulses from Sagittarius A. They were rhythmic, deliberate. Dr. Amankwa realized the awful truth: the Eater of Horizons hears us. Every Leviathan we slay, every hymn we silence, draws its gaze closer. We are not ending the war, we are summoning its master. Her warning spread slowly, drowned by the roar of triumph. Humanity had seized momentum, and no leader dared speak of restraint. But in quiet chambers, in the silence of observatories, those who listened to the abyss knew the truth. The turning tide was not salvation, it was escalation. Humanity's victories had been costly. Entire colonies lay in ruin. Asteroids drifted shattered through the belt. Yet for the first time in decades, hope burned brighter than fear. Humanity no longer cowered before the Leviathans. They fought and they won. But the singularity resonance had not abated. In fact, it had grown louder, more insistent. Every pulse of the black hole reverberated through every instrument, through every mind attuned to it. The Eater of Horizons was aware, and it was coming. The assembly convened a council unlike any before. The leaders of Earth, Mars, the outer colonies, and the surviving military command met aboard the orbital Citadel Aegis. Dr. Amankwa presented the only viable plan. We cannot fight the Eater directly. It is beyond our comprehension, beyond our firepower. But we can use the Leviathans, their faith, their obsession, their instinct to our advantage. If we lure them back to the event horizon, we may be able to collapse the structures they worship and seal the rift temporarily. Admiral Calderon leaned forward. You mean bait them, trap them, and collapse the black hole's feeding grounds? Yes, Amankwa replied. It is the only way to give humanity a chance to survive. The assembly hesitated. The plan was audacious, unprecedented, and suicidal, yet it was the only hope. Humanity had no other choice. The Beacon of Dawn was constructed in orbit around Neptune, a massive satellite-sized vessel designed as both lure and weapon. Its core pulsed with hybrid energy, an artificial resonance that mimicked the hymns of the Leviathans, amplified tenfold. Captain Rafik Deneb, now seasoned from years skimming the edge of Sagittarius A, was given command. His fleet was smaller than it had been at the height of the Outer Belt battles, but faster, more agile, and armed with every weapon humanity could spare. The plan was simple: activate the beacon, draw the Leviathans out from scattered hiding places, lead them toward the inner solar system, past human traps. Collapse the beacon's energy core near the outer edge of Jupiter's orbit, detonating it in a pulse designed to mimic the collapse of a spire. Use the chaos to push the remaining Leviathans toward Sagittarius A, forcing them back to the black hole. It was a gamble the size of a star. When the beacon activated, the Leviathans responded instantly. Hundreds of serpentine and titanic forms emerged from the outer belt, from moons, from distant edges of the system. Their fractured hymns coalesced into furious crescendos. The first engagement was brutal. Leviathans collided with human cruisers, tearing through shields, lashing tendrils, and hurling energy beams that disintegrated frigates. Yet humanity had learned to fight differently. Ghost fleets intercepted the Leviathans, resonance torpedoes twisted hymns into madness, and hybrid ships delivered crippling strikes. For the first time, humans were dictating the terms of battle. Still, the sheer number of predators was overwhelming. Every loss was felt in the bones of Earth and Mars. Thousands of crew members died in the first wave alone. Deneb, aboard the Beacon of Dawn, saw the desperation and determination etched into the faces of his officers. "Hold fast," he ordered. "We are the line between them and the sun. If this falls, everything falls." Days passed. The Leviathans fell into the trap, chasing the beacon toward the inner solar system. By the time the fleet reached Jupiter, the Leviathans were numerous but contained. Deneb activated the core. Energy surged, pulsing with the amplified hymns. The vessel's hull groaned under the pressure. Human crews prayed, fought, and braced as the beacon became a miniature sun of destruction. Then, with a flash that lit Jupiter's clouds like molten metal, the core detonated. The shockwave ripped through space. Leviathans were torn apart, their bodies shredded by the hybrid energy pulse. Fragments were flung toward the outer solar system, many spiraling back into the black hole under its gravitational pull. The remaining Leviathans, those not destroyed outright, panicked. They fled, drawn by instinct and fear toward Sagittarius A. Their hymns, once triumphant, now became screams of terror and confusion. Humanity had done the impossible. They had turned the Reapers against their master. The victory was Pyrrhic. The Beacon of Dawn was obliterated. Nearly half the fleet had been lost. Human casualties numbered in the tens of thousands. Earth, Mars, and the colonies mourned, but there was no time to dwell. Humanity had inflicted a wound on the Eater of Horizons, but it had not killed it. The Leviathans were not gone. They were retreating, regrouping, and returning to the darkness from which they had emerged. Dr. Amanqua spoke quietly at the Assembly's emergency session. "We have won this battle, but the war is far from over. The Eater knows we exist. We have drawn its attention. Every Leviathan we destroy strengthens its awareness. It will remember us." Admiral Calderon clenched his fists. "Then we prepare, we endure, we fight smarter, harder, and faster. Humanity does not bow to gods, we carve our own fate." Even in the wake of destruction, hope emerged. The surviving Leviathans, fractured and fearful, no longer acted as a single force. Some even lingered near human space, silent, avoiding conflict. For the first time, humanity glimpsed the possibility of turning the enemy's fear into leverage. Colonies rebuilt faster than they had before. Training programs accelerated. Scientists pored over alien tissue and hybrid technology, preparing for the day the Eater returned. Humanity no longer waited for predators. It hunted, it prepared, it endured. And in the distance, Sagittarius A pulsed, patient, eternal, and aware. The war had reached a precipice. Humanity had survived, but the Eater of Horizons was awakening fully. And when it moved, nothing would escape its gaze. The solar system trembled as if in anticipation. Humanity had driven the Leviathans back, fractured their unity, and forced them toward the black hole. Yet the singularity resonance pulsed louder than ever. Instruments quivered, recording gravitational waves that bent light and time itself. The Eater of Horizons had stirred. The first sign came as a distortion in the outer planets. Saturn's rings warped, ice fragments spiraling in unnatural arcs. The moons of Jupiter trembled in resonance with a vibration that no natural phenomenon could produce. Humanity realized with dread that the Leviathan's retreat was no victory. It was an invitation. The assembly convened aboard the orbital fortress Aegis. Admiral Calderon, now weathered by decades of war, addressed the council. "We have fought their heralds, but their god awakens. The patterns we are seeing, the shifts in gravity, the distortions in the outer planets, they are deliberate. It is probing, testing, aware of us. Our defenses alone will not hold." Dr. Amanqua, face pale and eyes hollowed from years staring into the abyss, stood beside him. "It is not merely aware," she said quietly. It is learning. Every engagement we have fought, every Leviathan we have destroyed, it has absorbed. We have taught it our strengths, our tactics, our will, and now it knows us. The first wave of its manifestations struck in the outer system. Jupiter trembled violently, as if the planet itself had been grasped in a cosmic hand. Leviathans that had fled toward the black hole returned, warped and transformed, their bodies writhing with unfamiliar growths that pulsed with the same unnatural energy as the singularity resonance. They struck with terrifying precision, tearing human ships apart before they could respond. Humanity's fleet, battered and diminished, engaged with everything it had. Ghost fleets surged from hidden fields, resonance torpedoes detonated in the void, and hybrid ships unleashed torrents of energy drawn from alien tissue. Yet for every Leviathan destroyed, another emerged, stronger, faster, and more attuned to human tactics. The Eater was no longer distant. Its influence spread through every predator in the system. In orbit above Neptune, the Eventide, rebuilt and reinforced, became the command center of resistance. Captain Deneb coordinated strikes, weaving human forces through a complex ballet of ambushes and feints. Yet even he could feel the growing weight of inevitability. The Singularity's pulses bent the very fabric of space, stretching sensors and tearing communications. Ships vanished in sudden rifts, swallowed by currents of gravity they could neither resist nor predict. Desperate measures became humanity's only option. Dr. Amanqua proposed a plan that bordered on madness. The hybrid technology that had been humanity's greatest advantage, neural mesh, resonance amplification, and converted Leviathan tissue, would be concentrated into a single vessel, the Prometheus Ascendant. Its mission, to sail directly toward the Singularity, lure the Eater's attention, and detonate the hybrid resonance array at the event horizon, hoping to destabilize whatever consciousness lingered there. The Prometheus Ascendant was unlike any ship humanity had ever built. 5 kilometers long, its hull fused steel, alien tissue, and energy conduits glowing with unnatural light. Its engines pulsed like a heartbeat, tuned to the Singularity resonance itself. Pilots, engineers, and soldiers volunteered for the mission, knowing it was likely to be fatal. The assembly sanctioned it as the only way to buy time. As the ship launched, the Leviathans converged, sensing the hybrid resonance and the defiance of humanity. The fleets engaged one final time in the void beyond Uranus. The battle was apocalyptic. Ships collided with Leviathans in blinding flashes. Ice asteroids exploded under railgun fire, scattering debris that shredded the enemy. The void itself seemed to scream. The Prometheus Ascendant pressed on, undeterred. Its crew remained connected to the hybrid neural mesh, synchronizing with the pulse of the Singularity. They could feel the Eater observing, testing, reaching for them. Time bent around them. Stars seemed to stretch into streaks, planets shimmered, and the gravitational waves pulsed in patterns that made the ship's hull shudder as though it were alive. Finally, they reached the edge of the event horizon. The void stretched infinitely ahead, a black wound against the scattered light of the galaxy. The Eater's presence was palpable. It was not merely a mass of destruction. It was intent, curiosity, hunger, and intelligence all fused into something beyond comprehension. Captain Deneb's voice carried across the ship. Initiate the resonance. All channels online. Brace yourselves. The hybrid array surged, emitting waves that twisted the Singularity's own hymn into counterpoints of human defiance. Leviathan tissue flared as energy poured through the ship, amplifying every pulse, every vibration. The crew felt their minds stretch, teetering on the edge of sanity as they merged with the hybrid consciousness of their vessel and the neural fragments of fallen Leviathans. The Eater responded. A tidal wave of gravitational energy radiated outward, warping the solar system. Asteroids tumbled, moons shook, and every human fleet was tossed violently through space. Yet the Prometheus Ascendant held, its hybrid systems compensating, shielding its crew from the full force of the Singularity. Then, in a moment beyond perception, the array detonated. Energy surged into the black hole, a pulse of human will amplified by hybrid resonance. The event horizon quivered. The Eater shrieked, not with sound, but in waves of comprehension and awareness that reached every mind connected to the array. For an instant, the blackness itself seemed to recoil. Stars near the center of the galaxy flickered as though blinking in surprise. Leviathans, both near and distant, convulsed violently, their bodies torn by forces they could not understand. The singularity resonance faltered. The Eater had been struck, even if only partially, by the defiance of prey it had never anticipated would resist. The pulse collapsed. The Prometheus ascendant was shredded, its hull ripped apart by forces it had contained only through the merger of human and alien consciousness. Yet the shockwave propagated outward, reaching the remaining Leviathans. They panicked, scattering toward the event horizon, some tumbling into the void, others retreating beyond human reach. Humanity's fleets drifted among the wreckage of the battle. Countless ships had been lost. Thousands of soldiers and civilians were dead. Yet for the first time, the Eater's presence in the solar system had been diminished, its proxies shattered. Silence followed. The singularity resonance pulsed faintly, slower, almost hesitant. On Earth, Mars, and the outer colonies, survivors cheered, cried, and prayed. Humanity had done what seemed impossible. They had struck back at a force older than galaxies, had survived, and had forced retreat. Yet even in celebration, fear lingered. The Eater still existed. It had noticed them. It had remembered them. Dr. Amanquas spoke quietly to a gathering of leaders aboard the orbital citadel. "We have won a reprieve, not victory. We have shown it that we exist, that we resist, and that we can strike back. But it will not forget. Every Leviathan that remains carries its memory. Every fragment of its hymn is a warning." Admiral Calderon nodded, eyes hard. "Then we rebuild, we prepare. Humanity will endure, even if the abyss stirs again." From the edge of the black hole, a faint pulse returned. Not a sound, not a song, but a ripple that threaded the galaxy. A reminder of what had been and what would come. And humanity, battered but unbroken, looked to the stars and understood the truth of its survival. It was no longer merely a species fighting for existence. It was a species that had challenged the abyss and had endured. The Eater of Horizons waited, patient, eternal, and aware. But humanity had fired the first shot, and it had survived. The war was not over. It would never be over. Yet for the first time, the solar system was silent enough for hope to breathe. Humanity had lit its last beacon, and the darkness had flinched.